This is episode number 14 featuring CW Mundy. Welcome to the PleinAir Podcast from PleinAir Magazine. I'm your host, Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we dive into the world of outdoor painting called plein air painting. For those of you who don't know, it's a French term essentially meaning in the open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others pronounce it plein air, but no matter what you call it, there's a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is all about the movement, the painters, the collectors, the galleries, and the art. This week's podcast is brought to you by paintingnewzealand.com. Yep, you heard right. It's my desire to see more people fall in love with plein air painting, and you can help by sharing this podcast with your friends. We're up to 42,000 listeners already, and that's just in 14 episodes, so thank you so much. You can share it on social media, email, and of course you can find it on your favorite player for podcasts. If you want to subscribe, we'd like that, so it comes to you each and every week, except the last week or so where I've been a slacker because I was at the Plein Air convention and just didn't get this done. I apologize. If you have feedback or interview requests, you can reach me, Eric, at PleinAirMagazine.com. Today's interview is brought to you by EaselBrushClip.com. So let's get right to it with artist CW Mundy. Hey, CW.
Hey, Eric.
What are you doing today, anyway?
I've been working on that 5-string banjo, working on understanding the matrix of the neck, and today I'm not painting, so I split the time between the banjo, Bible study, my wife, and art.
So how you can't play banjo and paint at the same time, I guess, can you?
Well, you probably could.
You could put a brush in your mouth.
Yeah, well, I have a friend I had dinner with the other day, and he was talking about that's what he does when he's taking a break and he's looking at the painting. He grabs his guitar and works it over, and then he sets it down and goes back to the painting.
Yeah, well, you were probably talking to me about that because that's exactly what I do. If I get to a point where I'm stuck, I have a couple of guitars in my studio, and so I just pick up and play for a while, and it kind of gets my brain into a different place.
Yeah, it sure does.
Yeah. So all these people listening to this want to know about you. Is there anything that we should tell them? Because I can't think of a good thing to say.
Well, neither can I. That makes two of us. Plant your corn early.
Plant your corn early. Yes, you are from Indiana.
That's right, baby.
So, in spite of the fact that you're world famous and a legend in your own mind, tell the people out there who might be listening to this, who might not know you, what it is you do anyway.
I try to be a good husband to a wonderful wife that I have. I try to be a good friend to the friends that I have and our family, and I try to be nice to people that don't want to be nice, and that's a good, wonderful challenge. And I'm lost for words here. I paint to amuse myself, and it's the same thing with the music. I'm, as you know, and I've said at your workshops and your plein air convention, I'm just a child trapped in an adult body, and as I told David LaFell, I just want to see what I can get away with. Which raised eyebrows.
Yeah, well, it should raise a lot of eyebrows. So you, I don't think we've ever talked about this. I know you were a professional musician for a long time, but were you painting at the time? Why don't you kind of take us way back to the early 1800s when you were born, and give us a feel for your life as a painter.
Well, I was actually Claude Monnett's next door neighbor back in the 1800s. No, I was out in California. I went out there in 1969 after I graduated from college, and to survive, I did dog portraits and things of that nature, and played volleyball on the beach,
So had
basketball.
you had gone to school for painting, or how did you learn to paint? How'd that come about?
Well, the painting all started when I was a freshman down at Lenore Ryan College on a basketball scholarship, and I got some art supplies and painted something in the dorm, uh, which we have in our collection.
The dorm, you have the dorm in your collection?
Yeah, I have the dorm,
Yeah.
and 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 the ball players all said, "Man, you ought to go to a college where you can get an art education." And so the other freshman guard that was on the ball team, we didn't have a freshman team. We just played on the varsity. Well, he got all the good playing time as a freshman because his uncle was the coach, and I saw there wasn't much future there, so I left and transferred to Ball State University, where I got my undergraduate and studied and took all the teaching courses that they had. It was a teaching college at the time. Played basketball there and took all the art courses that they had. And then when I graduated from that, I ended up going out to California, and then I went to Long Beach State, where I worked on my master's in painting and drawing. And then I studied under Donald Putman, who is one of the greatest painting instructors to ever teach in Art Center in Pasadena. I took private lessons from him, painting from life.
Wow. So were you on the Ball State basketball team?
Yeah, I played basketball there. Yeah.
Wow.
We had a great high school team that went, to the state, semi-state. Well, we were in the state tournament. We went to the semi-state. The biggest guy on our team was 6'3", but boy, we could run. We could pick you to death on a man-to-man offense, and then we could shoot over the zone if they played a zone. So we had a really great team, and I didn't really have a lot of talent. It's kind of like everything that I've done in my life, and I thank the Lord for that. I really had to work hard at everything. I wasn't a gifted athlete, but I practiced and played all the time, and that's the same thing I do with my art. And it's the same thing. Here I am 70 years old, and this romance that I have with the neck on the 5-string banjo, most people are cashing it in, eating bonbons and watching the soap operas, but I got stuff to do. That's how I got kicked out of kindergarten. The kindergarten teacher said, "Okay, now it's time we got all lay down on these mats. It's 1:00 and we got to take a 45-minute nap." And I looked at the teacher and I raised my hand. I said, "Hey, we sleep at home. We sleep at night. We don't sleep in the daytime." And so she called the principal, and I was out. And I got a big spanking from my dad. But that's, like I said, I'm a child trapped in an adult body. I don't want to grow up. I just want to be responsible.
Well, and I think that, one thing, I was talking to a friend of mine today about age, and I think there's very much a state of mind. And it's interesting where we both have friends who are kind of hanging their headphones up. That's what we used to say on radio. They're hanging it up, and they're not very old really, but they're thinking about retiring, and they're not going to do much, and and I look at things and say, I got too much to do. I got, dozens and dozens and dozens of years of work ahead to be able to catch up. So I'm not slowing down. It doesn't sound like you are either.
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Eric. I'm going to die not being able to accomplish what I could.
So when you die, will the value of your paintings go up or down?
No, they'll probably drop down. They'll probably be on the same quality with Thomas. I won't mention his last name.
Okay. So when you were when you kind of got this painting kick when you were little, or when you were in college, were there paintings that spoke to you that said, "Hey, this is the motivation I need to get into this"? Was there something that you saw that really inspired you?
Yeah, my two superstars when I was a child was Norman Rockwell and Walt Disney.
Yeah.
So this painting that I did was a takeoff from the scenes that you would see in a dramatic Walt Disney cartoon, and I painted this old Model T coming through a covered bridge with its headlights on and the light coming through the cracks of the wood, and had a real scary sky and the dramatic sky in the background. And it was, my first attempt with not knowing anything or having any help.
Were there paintings in any museums that in any specifics? You talked about Rockwell and Disney. So Disney inspired you. Was there some particular painting that Rockwell did that spoke to you?
Negatar. Well, yeah, the painting, but when the museums, I want to respond to the museums because negatory, that was not on our vocabulary, and there were no museums in the 1950s in Indianapolis, and there was no place to go to, and it wasn't on our bucket list.
Right.
In fact, the neighbors, what's so interesting, the neighbors would say to me, Chucky, what are you going to do when you grow up? And I'd raise my hand and I'd go, I'm going to be an artist. And they go, what? And I go, I'm going to be an artist. And they go, no, you're not. You got to punch a clock like the rest of us. But thank God that never happened.
So had you gotten exposed at all at any point to the Indiana artists that were down there in Brown County and south of Indianapolis? I grew up in Indiana, and I had never been exposed to any of that. I wondered if you had.
No. Negator. I didn't know TC Steele or any of the Hoosier Group existed or any of that stuff. I didn't know the legacy and the history that we had. But I did have favorite paintings back to Rockwell. I mean, this is the gospel truth, man. I would sit. That was the only time that my mother knew where I was during the day, was the day that the postman was going to be bringing the Norman Rockwell magazine, and I would meet the postman. I would sit on our little milk box. Remember when you're a little kid, you had that galvanized milk box that the milk truck would come and set it in there, and then you'd take it into the house. Well, I'd sit on that milk box and wait for my Saturday evening post, and he would give it to me, and I would go in the house, and this is the truth. I would go in the house and I would stare at the cover for 35 to 40, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. I didn't even go inside the magazine to look at the illustrations yet. All I could do was be amazed. I mean, literally fascinated and amazed that a human being could do this. And, I think about JFK's portrait or Dwight Eisenhower's. I think of these portraits, let alone the narratives that he would do, like, the two plumbers inside the lady's bedroom, and they're spraying the other guy with a little her perfume. The narratives were unbelievable, but the talent and the ability and the craftsmanship, the draftsmanship. Rockwell was not only a great illustrator as N.C. Wyeth, but he was a truly great artist, truly gifted.
Did you ever, in your career, get a chance to finally meet him?
No, but we went to his home, and we got to see the museum. And early in my illustration career, what I did was, because I studied him naturally at great depth, I would do a pencil graphite lay-in exactly like he would, and then I would take transparent oil washes and put it over the top to semi-opaque, and I copied his styles, and I would use that when I was doing sports illustration for the NBA and sports impressions out of New York, and I worked for a lot of the PGA, the Olympics, and all other kind of things. And I would do a very representational, photorealistic work of art that would take me, 2.5 weeks to produce. to produce the piece.
And how long did you do illustration as a living?
I did it for about 25 years.
Oh, you did? A long time.
And it was really the death of me, because it was all about, the whole production of the whole thing, and, rendering everything to death, and everything was photorealistic. And the only joy I had was in putting what we call the photo scrap together to come up with a decent design. But then the execution of the painting was just drudgery. After doing it for 25 years, you're talking about not having any joy in your work. And then when I found out, when Rebecca and I, after we had gotten married, we had discussed the whole thing about leaving the illustration career and going to fine art. And when I found out that I could do a 16 by 20 in an hour and a half and make the same money that I would make for an illustration, you talk about being let out of jail. It was a whole new epiphany.
So did you just quit cold turkey? What did you do?
Yeah, that was pretty much. Well, I had this gallery in Indianapolis, Mike Sigmund, who's a very close friend of ours. I called him up one day and I said, "Hey, Mike, CW Mundy, and would you have any interest in showing, any of my work?" And he goes, "Oh man, are you kidding? I'd love to have that Sports Illustration stuff in there." And I go, "Mike, no, that's not what I'm talking about." And he goes, "Well, what do you mean?" And I go, "Well, I'm trying my hand. My wife and I love Impressionism, and I'd like to bring a couple pieces over there and show you, what I come up with." And he said, "Okay." So I went out and did a couple of paintings. I know one was the Broad Ripple Canal, and I don't remember what the other one was. The one was 11 by 14, and I think the other one was a 12 by 9. And I gave them to him, and he said, "Well, I'll put a frame on them. I'll hang them up." He sold them the next day.
Wow.
And that was the whole transformation. I just knew for myself that there was much more in the art experience than being a slave to technique, a slave to procedure. So
looking back, now that you have hindsight, which is 2020, what advice would you give people today in terms of what they should be doing with their lives, with their careers, based on that experience that you had? You
mean with their art?
Yeah. I mean, it took you 25 years to go for it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I have learned, though, Eric, that originally when all that happened, I wanted to shut that whole illustration career and throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Because I had such a long drought of having an emotional connection with the artwork. It was only a way of putting food on the table. And I did have an affinity with all the athletes, so because of my athletic years. So I did love that, but it was so painstaking and it wasn't enjoyable. And so the message that you asked that I would share to the people is, look, you have that inner voice in you. With me, it's my spiritual relationship with Jesus Christ and my relationship with the Trinity. So, but that inner voice, and you need to listen to it, and you need to follow that, and you need to follow your heart, and don't be something that you don't think that you are, and try to find out. I think the best advice that I could give anybody is to really do some inner searching in yourself and see what is life about, the philosophy of your life, the philosophy of existence. What is it? And then go after that trips your trigger.
You graciously invited me into your home in Indianapolis, and I got a chance to go into the back bedroom and see some of the early CW Mundy paintings that you still had. And your work from that period to today has dramatically transformed. Your work was tighter. It was still impressionistic, but it was still more illustrative than it is now. And you made another leap somewhere in the middle of all of that. How did that happen? What's that all about?
It's the transformation of, when I left illustration, my wife told me, said, we're going up to Chicago to see the Monet exhibit where he had 241 or 42 originals. And I said, I've already studied that at the master. I don't really want to go. And she said, I really want to go. So I went because it was a desire that she had. And when we got out there and I saw the exhibition, I was so blown away, Eric, because I looked at that and I said, you know what? That's me. And I can paint that. And my whole direction was that I told myself, if I could come up with a turn of the century authentic style and leave illustration and come up with an accepted turn of the century look, and I knew how to find it because I loved to look in the art books and study it, I said I could have a career. And that was the big change in the turning point. And then my wife and I prayed a great deal about a trip to France, and we went to France in 1995 and did our first collection, which was called the Passage de France, which means landscapes of France. And we were there for a month and a half, and I painted 60-some PleinAir pieces, and we brought it back and had an exhibition at that gallery that I'd mentioned, at Mike's Sigmund's gallery in Indianapolis, and that was, the rest is history. I mean, that launched that, and then all of the advertising that we had started, and then we continued on after that in American Art Review.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So, well, let's talk about that for a second, because I think that there's to some extent a sense of, if you build it, they will come. And you took a big career leap. What was the advertising like? How much did you do? How long did you do it? And what did you see as a result of that?
Well, this is one of the things that I do in my workshops. We have a Thursday afternoon time where my wife and I tell them, we use my template as a career, and tell them, this is how we did it, and it can still work. I had to convince Rebecca that we needed to come up with a certain amount of money for an advertising budget, because if the big corporations, and that's how they exist, there must be some truth to it. And I said, we have to believe in ourselves. So what we did, we figured out, we came up with, it was about $25,000 to $28,000 annual budget on doing a full page ad in the magazine. And there was one other artist from Boston that was in American Art Review, and he was the only other living artist. Everything else was deceased, but a deceased work. But so we advertised in that magazine, and then it wasn't long. We did that for a 10-year period. And all through that time, we kept getting artists contacting me and asking me, how did it work? Oh, did I think that it would be a good idea for them? And I told them, it's very important. You have to believe in yourself, and you've got to step up to the plate. We didn't need a fancy home. We've never been into that, and we always invested, put the money back into the career. And doing that, and you see the people now that are doing it in your magazines, your two magazines, if they believe in themselves and step to the plate and put that money in and do the proper advertising, you just can't pay for a full page ad and then think all the world's going to jump on your bandwagon. They watch you like a hawk to see if you hit and miss, and see if you're predictable, if your work is consistently good, and all those things. And once you confirm that with them, for about a year, that advertising, then they start jumping on your bandwagon, and then they start buying your work. And so in actuality, not knowing this, Eric, that's how I became a brand in the industry, was that I branded myself.
Well, and that's exactly what I teach in my art marketing boot camp. I was talking to I think it was Scott Jones from Legacy Gallery the other day, and I said, how do you discover artists? He says, I watch who's advertising. I watch I watch them when they're advertising, because if I see them advertising, that I know that they're confident. I know that they're behind their careers. I know that they're pushing themselves, which is a good indicator. And it also is an opportunity for me to watch them month after month after month. And he said, sometimes I'll watch them for 2 or 3 years and pick them up. Sometimes I'll pick them up fast. Sometimes I'll never pick them up, but it just depends. And I think the one thing that I keep telling people is, that first year is the hardest. I always tell the story about Laurie Putnam, who is becoming pretty well known now. And, she came to Art Marketing Boot Camp at the PleinAir convention that first year. And she was essentially broke. She was not bankrupt, but she was close. And she committed to doing an annual of advertising in every issue of Fine Art Connoisseur. And I said, you're going to call me about 8 months into it and say nothing's happening, and you're going to have to hang in there. And so sure enough, about 7-8 months into it, she calls me and said, I'm really not seeing any results. I said, it's just give it some time. It's got to build momentum. And she hung in there, to her credit. And that's where most people hang it up. Most people start, they run one or two ads, and then they go, well, this isn't working. And then they stop, and they don't realize that they have to build momentum and people watch them. And then, look at how she's been consistent now for 5 years, and her career is soaring. And I'm really fascinated to hear your story, because it's very similar.
Yeah, it's one thing to launch your career. It's a whole other thing. It's one of my favorite quotes. It's another thing to sustain it. But you have to know how to launch it, and the way that you launch it is, so many people, the artists don't have a business sense, and this is an extra gift that God gave me. I mean, business math I'm terrible at, but business concepts seemed to be something that he put before me, and that was invest in yourself. That first gallery, we said, this is what we want to do. Will you do a show? He was selling my work, and he goes, well, why won't I? Because Rebecca and I, we spent we looked at the whole picture. We had $71,000 in the bank, owned our 2 cars, and owned the house, and had no debt. And we looked at this first adventure to France that we were going to pull off, and we did, we crunched all the numbers. It was going to be a $55,000 investment. Well, we had $71,000 in the bank. We're willing, because we prayed about it, and we got clearance, really, from God to do this, because we prayed a lot about it. We didn't want to just do this and not have the clearance. So anyway, the $55,000 investment covered a full-blown 24-minute video of me painting the paintings on location, an $8,000 to $10,000 high quality catalog, $2,500 for the 2-page spread, fold out spread in American Art Review, $22,000 we pre-ordered for French frames, and the $15,000 that it was going to cost for us to be there, the traveling and the room and board and all that, in 1995. And so the gallery we told the gallery guy, you don't have to have any investment in it whatsoever. We'll do it. We'll pull it off. And he got 50%. So we come back and we have the show, Eric. This is what we tell our the people that come to our workshops when we talk about the business. We had the exhibition opening night. We sold almost everything we had. And then people came back on Friday night and bought some. And so we ended up selling over $190,000 worth of artwork in 1995. And he got his 50% of it, and we got the other 50%, but we were willing to go on that knowing we were going to spend $55,000. We told the Lord, if we can just sell $50,000 worth of artwork, that means we get $25,000 back from our investment. That means we spent $30,000 to have a full page ad, to have a high quality video of me painting the work, a catalog, an advertisement in a magazine. It was worth us to spend the $30,000. Well, guess what? We got these letters when the American Art Review came out from these superstars in the industry, because I was, this is when we were first trying to knock on the door and get attention. And these guys wrote us and said, "Hey, Mundy, kudos, way to go. What you pulled off is really incredible." And it was encouragement from my peers, people that I looked up to that I never even knew. And it was so exciting to get those letters from these people that I looked up to that were already big brands in the industry, and they were telling me, kudos, way to go. So it really backs up what you're talking about. You have to believe in yourself, and then you have to step to the plate. How many new cars do you need? How many sets of clothes? The list goes on and on. The material things, you need to put the money where it's going to really help you, because people sit around and think they're going to get discovered from a gallery. And I got news for you. As you know, there's so many artists in the stable, and it's, and they're not going to do the advertising that you can do if you really step to the plate. So that's what we did.
And you become attractive if you go to a gallery and you say, "Hey, listen, I'm supporting my own career. I'm going to list you in here. As my paintings are available through you, and I'm spending X amount of dollars, and I'm going to support my career for, forever." Then suddenly it becomes very attractive for them. And they do market artists and they do build collections, but they can't market all of them all the time. So that's a real powerful story.
Yeah, I think that most artists are under the illusion they think I'm going to be the next hottest thing that's going to come down the pike, and they might actually, you really have a lot of really talent and something new to offer, but if they're going to leave it up to the whole production of a gallery and into somebody else's hands, like you say, they got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 other people that they're working with, that they're asking the same thing from them that you're going to be asking them, get me out there, get me to the clients, get me going. So, it takes a lot more inertia and a lot bigger vision than most people. When it really comes down to it, I don't think they have the confidence to believe in themselves. And
how do you get that confidence? You had 25 years of illustration experience, which probably hurt you in some ways and helped you in other ways. Now, how do you know that you're ready? How do you know that you've got the confidence to move forward?
Well, the other thing that I didn't mention that I had done in 1995, it was in 1994. I'm looking through all the magazines and I'm seeing Clyde Aspavig, Scott Christensen, Dan Gerhardt's, and I look, as I'm doing right now, I look at my wife and I go, man, these cats know stuff that I don't know. And so, even though I was selling like crazy at this gallery, I mean, they just turn over the stuff, because that was really the booty years of in 1991, 92, 93, 94, 95, all the way up to 2001, man. The galleries couldn't keep inventory because the advantageous collecting that all the collectors were doing, they were buying stuff like crazy. But anyway, getting back to my point, I saw these guys in the magazines and I go, I can't paint that way, but I want my quality to be that way. So we invested in ourselves, and I took Dan Gerhardt's class, and then I took Scott Christensen's class, and then after I took Scott's, I took Dan Gerhardt's at another place again to get a refresher and to get that back up. And Dan told me after my, I don't remember, it was the first class. I think it might have been my first class with him. It definitely was after the second one. And he told me, he said, CW, he said, I know you understood and got what I was trying to teach. He said, you go home and after you paint 15 paintings, he said, you're going to be really excited. And so, that was a big encouragement because, I couldn't execute it what I learned from him, but you can't because you have to have the mileage. He said 15 paintings. Well, guess what? We went home after the third or fourth painting. I did this with my hand, and it wasn't about money. It was about the understanding. I went cha-ching, baby. And I looked at Rebecca because I showed her the painting, and I said, I know this is sort of academic, but I need that strong academic undercurrent in my work. And then I add the personality to that, because I'm like a child trapped in an adult body. I can find my voice. I just need this academic teaching that I got from those guys. And I didn't want to be a Gerhardt's clone. I didn't want to be a Scott Christensen's clone. And so, I did that. And even later in my career, I studied, I spent a lot of time studying with Carolyn Anderson. And I just like 4 years ago, I took Sharon McGraw's class out in Connecticut on drawing.
Do you remember, you mentioned Carolyn, do you remember the first time we met?
The first time you and I met?
Yeah.
Well, it was in Vermont. Yeah, that's right.
It was in Vermont. You were painting with Peter Miller, Carolyn Anderson, Ton Reifers. I don't know. There were a couple other people there. And I came over and I got to set up next to you. I think my hands were shaking the whole time. I was so intimidated. And you kept telling me to stop rendering.
Well, what I remember was, and Carolyn and I, we were talking about the other day, because Carolyn, she was in shock mode. I won't mention the artist's name, but, you brought in a piece, we're in Peter's studio, and you said, I really like, if you would take the time, I'd really like to critique the painting. And so we were all sitting around there wondering, well, what's he going to say, And so the artist ended up scraping your painting. Do you remember that?
I do remember it, and I had, it was a rainy day in the studio, and we couldn't go outside, and I think all four of you ended up painting on my painting, and I made all four of you sign it. I still have that painting.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, well, Todd, this one artist had he had some real bad problems, and he was feeling bad the whole week. We were out painting PleinAir, and he threw up.
I thought he was having a heart attack. Yeah.
Yeah, that was that breakfast after we had that breakfast with you, and he had this great big breakfast, and then I started teasing him, and he wasn't too happy about that because me, I'm always joking about everything. And but that was the first time that we got to meet, and I love Peter Miller, man. That guy's out there. He's an ADD, whatever,
Crazy
his
man.
art and stuff that he can come up with. When he hits on something, man, it's beyond genius.
I remember the one story he tells. He say anytime he'd get a call from the gallery and say, I have this painting, it's been sitting here and it hasn't been selling, he'd say, send it back to me. He'd get it back. He'd paint a steeple into the trees or into the distance, and then he'd send it back, and it would sell immediately.
Yeah. Yeah, Peter, I love him, man. We have so many Peter Miller stories, but we need to move on.
So what do you think about the state of the world we're in today from an art perspective? You got this tug of war going on between the modern world and the academic world. Where do you see things going? How do you feel about things?
Well, I just think there's a much greater audience, and I don't. The sad thing I would say is the millennials are a whole nother breed, a whole nother audience, and their likes are something totally different than the baby boomers. But the problem with the millennials, they don't want to collect anything. They don't want to buy anything. They don't want to be. They just don't collect anything. They're mavericks. They just live their life sort of from day to day. So that the collection thing is I think it's a sad state for the collectability of art, because they don't. It's not that they don't appreciate it. They appreciate it in different ways.
Well, but you have to understand, though, that historically people don't start collecting things till they're older anyway. Till they're.
And maybe they will,
yeah.
But I don't know if those millennials will ever be in the pocket that we are. But maybe they will be. But the problem that we have with the baby boomers, Eric, is that they've been the supporters for all the art since the late 1980, 85, all the way up. They started buying all the regional, the money pocket of the baby boomers that loved art. They bought all this stuff from the great regional impressionists all over this country, and then started building in their collection. And then when I came along in 95 or 96, all these collections were full. And the only thing which was good for me, the only thing that was circulating were the C, D, and F paintings of these guys. So they started jumping over ship and buying people like myself and other people that had a strain of a turn of the century old, a sort of academic old look to their work. Well, they would buy that. But now the problem is, Eric, all the baby boomers, the kids, they're empty nested. They're downsizing their home, and they're selling their work because they don't have any room for it. So it's really kind of caused, I think, a problem for the marketplace, because they're unloading instead of collecting like they really did in the from 1999 and then to 2001. I mean, it was unbelievable what you could produce and what you could sell and what they would buy. But then after 9/11, things changed a lot, and then we were in that recession in 2007 that went on, and I still think we're in a recession right now, even though the government doesn't want to talk about it.
Well,
but,
I think it's interesting because the other day, you didn't make it to Tucson this year to the PleinAir convention, but the other day in Art Marketing Boot Camp, I was talking about this very thing. I can have two people and two conversations on the same day, and one conversation is telling me how much artwork he or she is selling and how good business is, and the other conversation is how the recession is destroying things and how bad business is. And what I find is that people sometimes, first off, it has everything to do with where you're focusing your attention, right? So if you're focusing your attention in let's say you're in Indianapolis and things are not great in Indianapolis, and that's the only marketplace you've got, then you're in a little bit of trouble. But so you need to spread your wings a little bit. But what I find is that the people who are not doing as well are people who are not following the disciplines that made them successful in the first place, right? So you talked about how you have to make a commitment, and it's kind of a lifetime commitment. You just got to keep supporting yourself, and you got to build your career, and then you got to sustain your career. And I think that a lot of the people that are not doing as well, I find the pattern seems to be they're not sustaining, right? They're not doing as many shows as they used to do. They're not promoting as heavily as they used to promote. They're not advertising consistently, things like that. And yet those who are seem to be doing better.
Well, there's no question about that. I don't disagree with you at all on that. In fact, that's the situation that we're in. I'm 70. My wonderful wife Rebecca's 65. We've worked our butt off for the last 20 some plus, years or more, 25 years in this market. And the thing that I see that's pretty interesting is the price break for me, because I am this national brand, and we've worked the prices up to where they are. Well, what's interesting, and I'm the first to admit it, there are all these young artists that are coming into the market that are unbelievable, and their product, in my way of thinking, is every bit as good as mine, and maybe even in some cases even better. And their price break is a lot less than mine, because they haven't been a brand as long as I have, and they haven't worked their prices up to it. I mean, but it's okay for us, because we don't really care if we sell anything or not anyway, because we don't need to, because we made our money in the market. And like you said, we don't do the advertising. We don't do the appearances as much. We just turned down an opportunity to be in Venice at a symposium because we're 70 years old and we got too much on the calendar that month anyway.
Right.
So, but I think you're spot on about what you said. Yeah, our gallery manager told us, but this is when we were trying to really kind of slow down the process. She said, Rebecca, CW, you've got to stay in front of your audience. If you don't stay in front of your audience, they're going to go to sleep. It doesn't take them very long to forget. And we realize that. But at this time in our life, we look at it, it's time for all these other people to rise to the top, and we've had an unbelievable run. It doesn't mean that I don't want to paint and create. I'm more excited about painting and creating than I probably ever have, and I've got a lot more mileage behind me. And the product that I think that I'm producing today is some of the best stuff that I've ever done. But do I want to do those things? No, because I'm a 70-year-old man and I don't need the money, So,
well, quit telling yourself you're a 70-year-old man. You're still young. Stop it. Now,
well, yeah, I know, but let's put it this way. Put it this way. My adventure, like I said, this adventure, this study that I'm doing on the neck and understanding the matrix of the banjo is so exciting to me, because it's unexplored territory
right.
for myself. It's the same thing with my painting. All the stuff that I'm doing with these portraitures, and now I'm off into using medium that I never used in my life, the Galca light and Neil McGilp and the Marge. And all this stuff, and then trying that, and then I'm in such a wonderful experimental stage, and we got these paintings that I keep producing stuff, and they're just filling up the house, and we don't really even care about sending them out and sending the piggy to the market anymore, because we're locked into this whole creative thing,
Well, that's nice. Well, let's.
So
go ahead.
I just want to say this. And please understand, and the audience understand, I feel very fortunate. I can't tell you how fortunate that I don't have any demands on me other than my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, to serve him only. And that's it. I don't have to worry about money. I know I'm in a very unbelievable place in my life, but I still am excited to work,
Hey, let's switch gears.
Yeah.
Let's talk about painting for a tad bit, okay?
Yeah.
Got a lot of plein air painters out there, a lot of studio painters. Obviously, it's kind of hard to talk about painting or to throw some tips out there when you're talking on the telephone or on a microphone. But can you throw a couple things at us that might be helpful? I will tell you, I think I have told you, that when I went to your pre-convention workshop at Plein Air Convention last year, something switched. And after watching you for a day and a half, something switched. I picked up some things that were really important to me. And, people always say nice things about your paintings because they're trying to be nice to you. But, they oftentimes you can tell that they're just being nice. Oh, nice colors. And after that experience, all of a sudden, people were going out of their way to tell me about my paintings, and all of a sudden, my paintings were selling better. Everything was happening as a result of that. And I think the key thing, that wasn't the only thing, but the key thing was your composition thing. You want to talk about that?
Well, that, the whole backbone of creating art and creating visual images with paint and everything, you have to understand that painting is a science. And so what I have garnered from all my years in this, ever since being a young child and doing stick figures and copying my dad, what he would do, you have to understand that it's a science, and it's based on scientific understanding that we have in the history of art and the way that the brain thinks. The eyes, when we look at anything that we look at, only 15% that we look at is in we can focus on. The rest becomes peripheral and unfocusable, and we only see values and shapes, and we don't see any edges, because that's the way God made us see. We only see 15%. So that's a scientific fact, and it can be taken over in the way that you can create your work, to not have the whole canvas have everything be in perfect focus, because it's not the way we see. You can in a design thing, I've learned the simplicity of having, if you're going to do representational art, you go with the centrality focus design concept instead of the equalization theory that the modernists came in, where they don't want your eye to land anywhere. Your eye just floats all over the canvas, and that's what the modernists came up with. And you can do that with representational work, because our good buddy Kwang Ho, that's one of his things that he loves. He loves the equalization theory. He doesn't want a resolve or an anchor in his composition most always. He wants you to just keep moving everywhere. Even though it's not non-objective work, it's still objective representational work.
Yeah,
but with me, beg your pardon?
Oh, I was just gonna intercede that Kwang is doing the pre-convention workshop next year in San Diego. So you said something that I want to make sure is clarified before we move on, and that is that you said centrality of focus, but I think somebody who doesn't understand what you mean there, you're not saying put the focal point in the dead center of the painting.
No. I'm saying, but within a rectangular shape, if you study Fibonacci and that whole thing that he came up with, the spiral and the natural thing that we see in life, like if you see a hurricane and you take a picture of that from a satellite and you look down, it's the way it spheres, it goes, it's like the shell, and it's based on a mathematical equation, and the Greek architects were the first ones to use that Fibonacci thing, and it would be up in the upper right part of the painting would be that that's when the artist took it from the architectural understanding of the Fibonacci, what's it called, the swirl, or
right, the golden mean.
The golden means. And then the artists like Da Vinci and these other guys started realizing they could do that with art. So my whole thinking was that if it could work up in that upper right section, why can't you turn the shell on its back and it could be down in the bottom lower right, or it could turn it on the other way, and then it could be the upper left quadrant or the lower left quadrant. In other words, if you were to take a tic-tac-toe, a rectangle, and make a tic-tac-toe board and have 9 equal rectangles where those lines intersect and cross over, those areas are definitely areas that you could use that fit within the golden means, no matter how you flip the swirl.
Right, and you put your focal points in one of those.
Yeah, well, that's the starting point. Yeah, you don't have to. It doesn't have to be right there, but it's a good rule of thumb, because that's what the history of art everybody did. They mostly they would anchor it in that upper right, because that's just what they did. So, but anyway,
you talk about wanting to draw the eye to, so let's assume that you've picked one of those four spots and you want to draw the eye there. You talked about contrast and chroma in those particular spots. You want to address that?
Yeah. Okay. If you're going to anchor a resolve or an anchor or a centrality focus in the composition, how can you achieve that? Well, it's real simple. You can put your darkest dark and your lightest light right there with the sharpest edge, and I guarantee you that's where you're going to go. The other way that you could do that is have your strongest chroma right there in that area and have it isolated. Then your eye's going to go there because there'll be nothing else like it, which is the alien factor that I talk about as well in composition. Or you could have your heaviest paint right there and have it thin everywhere else. That will draw your attention. These are the factors that you can use, the tools that you can use to draw your attention to where you wanted to look at. The other obvious thing is you could render that area and then paint everything else a lot looser. In other words, you have your primary, you render your primary, your secondary becomes looser painting style, and your tertiary becomes totally abstract and unidentifiable. So it's just a logical way of establishing an anchor or resolve, so that, you know, I could bring 10 plumbers into my studio and show them a painting, and out of the 9 of the 10 could tell me what was the first thing that they saw and the thing that they remembered, if I do my job well on the painting.
Oh, you had 10 plumbers in your studio lately?
Well, I could. Just to prove, I mean, that I use the plumber because that, you know.
I get it.
Okay. Hello, is anybody home? You're trying to make fun of me.
I am making fun of you.
I'm trying to be serious, man, and now you're ripping me a new one.
Yeah, well. Okay, so leave us with a couple more tips, and then we're going to hang it up.
Well, gee, we just got started, man. We got to do a second podcast so we can finish.
We can we can always do a part 2.
Yeah, part 2. You know, I was at my wife and I had to go to this friend of ours' unfortunate funeral, who cancer got the best of him and he couldn't get cured. And but on the cover was this picture and this quote by Evan Asar, and it said, "We can't do much about the length of our lives, but we can do plenty about the width and the depth." And that quote is something that is really the most important thing to me in my walk with the Lord, is that I've got a certain amount of hours here on this planet, and what I want to spawn is love, to be a help to people, to be a servant, to serve people, and help them in any way that I possibly can. This other quote that I got from Oswald Chambers, one of the utmost for his highest, is one of the greatest classic editions that has ever been written, that supports everything that's in the Bible. And one of the things that I read just the other day that I just loved, he says, "Our reach must exceed our grasp." If you only reach out to what you can grasp, you know, you're missing the whole picture. We need to reach way beyond that. And that's been the, modus operandi of my whole life. I never once, I think, that I kind of got a glimpse or sort of felt that I got a hold of something and had an understanding. I got to keep moving beyond that, because there's no interest or no desire, and people are all wired differently. So I think those two quotes are really good things to think about, that our reach must exceed our grasp. We need to keep going beyond what we think we can get a hold of.
You know, I think that we kind of fall into this trap when we're artists of focusing on painting as part of our art. And I think that you've demonstrated that there's so much more depth to it in terms of what we're doing to feed our souls, what we're doing to feed our minds, what we're doing to stretch ourselves.
Yeah, you gotta be honest with yourself, man, and get that out. You know, people at the first brush of spring of the workshops that we did down in New Harmony, we let people ask the questions, and one of the, you know, of course, one of the always the question is, how do I find my voice? You know, where can I find my voice? And Carolyn Anderson and Jeff Legg and myself both wanted to answer that question, so we all three took a hit at it. And when it was my turn, I said, hey, you want to find your voice? Work your butt off and really work hard and get some mileage behind you. Your voice will just naturally appear. It's like, you know, my point was, you know, when we're in back in the day when you and I went to school in kindergarten, we had to learn how to print the alphabet. And then after that, the teacher taught us how to do cursive. Well, guess what happens to the guy that ends up being a doctor after he's, you know, had all that, you know, kindergarten education on printing and cursive writing? By the time he's 60 years old and he's a doctor, you can't read his name, but you can the pharmacist can sure identify his signature. You see what I mean?
Right.
And that's the thing that proves my point. Get a lot of mileage behind you, work your rear end off, and it'll be a natural evolution. You're who you are, and if you allow yourself to be vulnerable, you know, will come out. Another quick thing that I would mention with that was one of the comments that I was able to make was I stopped painting for the approval of men for a long time ago because I only remembered the daggers that were stuck in my back and stuck in my heart with people that said negative things about what I was doing or what I was trying to accomplish. You know, the naysayers. I didn't remember the positive things. And so God told me a long time ago, you paint them unto me, brother, and I'll be happy that you're working hard and you're creating, and then you don't have to worry about whether people like it or not. And that's really what I've done. And what's amazing, because I've released myself from that, I find there's so many more people because of the Facebook and the things that I've been able to be a part of, really appreciate what I try to share with them and teach them, and really appreciate my efforts in art. And so, but I don't paint them for the gallery's approval or man's approval. I just paint them under the Lord, and if he's happy, I'm happy.
Okay, so final question. It's your final day on Earth. Everything that you've ever done in your career has disappeared. There's no paintings. Nothing that you've done exists any longer. Your family, your friends are gathered around you, and they hand you a piece of paper, and they say, I want you to write down 3 truths in your life to pass on to others. What would they be?
Well, right off the top of my head was respect, love, and serve. The greatest thing that we can do is to give to people, because it's unbelievable what all comes back when we give to people. Serve people, serve people, serve people, and love, you know, love the ones that are unlovable, love them anyway. And I forget what the third one was.
Respect.
Yeah, respect. Yeah. You have to respect those people that don't think the way that you do, or believe the way that you do, or, as we, you know, vote the way that you want to vote. We'll stay away from the political thing, but that, you know, we have to, this country has really lost a lot of its respect for each other, and there's a wedge that just seems to be growing between a lot of people, and we need to respect people for their opinion, and they can have that opinion. They have to own it. It's not yours to own. You know, respect, love, and serve.
All right, man. Well, thank you for your time today.
Hey, man, I enjoyed it, Eric.
Thanks again to CW Mundy for a wonderful, heartfelt interview. CW, I really appreciate that. This interview was sponsored by easelbrushclip.com. It is a cool tool, and everybody's picking them up for their easels. Watch the video at www.easelbrushclip.com. This podcast, episode number 14, brought to you by paintingnewzealand.com. That's me. I'm taking just 50 people to New Zealand for a publisher's invitational, a week, actually 9 days of painting throughout the North and the South Island of New Zealand. It has spectacular scenery. That's where they filmed Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogy. And we're even going to go to the people who made Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit as a special guest. So it's going to be pretty cool. I think there's only about 10 seats left. Just find out more at paintingnewzealand.com. And remember, the plein air movement is red hot, and you can pick up PleinAir magazine on the newsstands. It's #1 representational art magazine in America at Barnes & Noble. Drop by, pick one up, or you can get a bi-monthly subscription for about half of what you would pay at the newsstand at pleinairmagazine.com. Well, this has been fun. Let's do this again sometime, hopefully next week. We'll see you then. I'm Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. And remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint it. We'll see you. Bye-bye.